Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Conversations on Conversations, where each week we explore a topic to have more powerful conversations with ourselves and each other. I'm your host, Sarah Noll Wilson, and joining me for a repeat appearance is Dr. Nika White as we talk about her new book, Inclusion Uncomplicated, an essential guide to simplifying DEI. Dr. Nika White is a national authority and fearless advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. As an award-winning management and leadership consultant, keynote speaker, published author, and executive practitioner for DEI efforts, she works with organizations across business, government, nonprofit, and education. Dr. White helps organizations break barriers and integrate DEI into their business frameworks. She is the founder of Nika White Consulting, NWC, where her firm works with organizations to identify and implement opportunities to embed DEI throughout its organization and culture. She has worked with over 200 clients, managed over $200 million in business assets for her clients, and written 2 books, 3 books now, on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am so excited to welcome Dr. Nika White to the show. Welcome back to the show. You are our first repeat guest on Conversations on Conversations, and I'm so honored and thrilled to be with you during this really exciting time. So how are you doing, Dr. Nika White?
Sarah, I am doing amazing, and I'm so glad to be reconnected with you, and I'm honored. This is the first time I'm hearing that actually I am the first one to be a return guest, and so I'm really, truly honored. Thank you kindly.
So for those of you, who may know, we're so happy to have you, and it's an exciting time, and talk to us about why it's such an exciting time.
Well, it's interesting. I believe, if I recall correctly, the last time that you were gracious enough to have me on, I mentioned the fact that I was in the early stages of kind of working on book number 3. And now that book is available to the world, and I am super excited about it. It's called Inclusion Uncomplicated, a Transformative Guide to Simplify DEI. And it's in partnership with Forbes Books, who is my publisher. And I'm just thrilled. I'm literally holding it in my hands, and I feel like it's been a long time coming. But isn't it exciting to actually get the product in your hands, to be able to feel and touch it and just like relish in the moment that, this is done. And I was a part of that. I did that. So pretty proud moment for me. But yes, Inclusion Uncomplicated.
I love it. And it's a beautiful matte finish. I can't wait to get my hands on it, because, okay, just so, full disclosure, when we're recording this, it's before it releases, but, she was gracious enough to give me a sneak peek of the book. So I've had a chance to read it, but I don't have the copy in my hand to hold up yet. Okay. So let's just, obviously the conversation we need to have is really important. And I do want to take a moment to congratulate you on this. I'm getting a little misty, actually.
Oh, thank you, friend. I do appreciate that. I do appreciate that. You know firsthand the investment of time and energy and emotional capital that goes into writing a book, making sure that your voice is just perfectly captured and that the impact of the book is able to be felt the way that you designed it, when we were in the creative writing phase. And so for you to congratulate me and give me a moment to pause and kind of take it in, I really do appreciate that. That's a gift. And so thank you so much, friend.
It's so exciting. And, I think for people who haven't gone through the process, and this might not be true for everyone, but I know in talking with other people, it's a very vulnerable process. Like you said, there's a lot of emotional labor. There's sort of an awareness of this is a snapshot in time, and, and am I communicating what I want to communicate? And there is something really incredible. I love hearing you talk about getting to hold it, that moment when you receive it and you go, talk to me about what that moment was like for you.
It was surreal. There was a
Mm,
slight delay, and I know that many authors have experienced that because supply and demand sometimes can be unpredictable. But there was a slight delay. I got it a few days after I had been told I would receive it, but when they came, I did what everybody else does. Immediately just grabbed the scissors, tore open the box, and literally it was more, I'm gonna reenact this for you. It was more of like just holding it. I didn't even open it for a while. I just held it and just kind of ran my hand around the cover.
mm,
And I think I probably hugged it a couple of times, and I just kind of looked at it, and then I went to the back. And yeah, I actually started flipping through it, and I'll tell you, there were moments where I would catch a certain paragraph, and when you write the book, all the content of the
mhm,
book, but you still kind of forget certain moments
mhm,
exactly, right? And
mhm,
so as I started
mhm,
reading it again, I was like, I am super excited to get this into the hands of others. And so I am so ready to hear what people think, how people are being
mm,
impacted, how people are being challenged, how people are being stretched, how people are being informed and equipped. I mean, this really is to serve as a guide. The
yeah.
subtitle is a transformative guide, and so I see people, dog-earing the pages, writing in the margins, and keeping it on their desk as a tool and a resource that they can refer back to time and time. And so this has definitely been a labor of love, but it's also been a labor of need. I have been
Mm,
holding um, some information that I just felt was really important to compile into one source. And so I'm so grateful that this platform opportunity presented itself, and grateful to Forbes Books for seeing something in my voice that they also wanted to support and get behind. And so I'm grateful to be in conversation with you today to delve a little bit deeper into the book. But yeah, it was a great experience to do the unboxing exercise.
yeah. And I can tell it's a sexy matte finish. I'm a big fan
it,
of the matte. There is
it
just
is.
something about the matte
So
finish
I
that
have
feels
to
so
tell you,
good.
I am, my background is marketing communications. I think you and I
Yeah.
talked about that before. And so branding is really important for me. One of the things that often people will comment on is my branding work. And I have a terrific
Yeah.
marketing communications partner. But the design of the book was something that I cared deeply about. I wanted it to be in my brand colors, although the book is not necessarily a product of NWC, which is my consulting firm, but NWC does this work. And so the way in which I show up to this work, it shows up within the organization.
Mm,
Um, but we went through several rounds before I landed on a design that I felt like, yes, and this is it. And I love the fact that I'm telling a little bit about the book, but there's a portion in the back, a little signature portion that's printed in color, and it has the chapter summaries. And I just love it. I do. Now I have to share though, and I'm hoping I'm not
I
alone in
love
this,
this.
even though I love it. And even though I have taken a moment to reacquaint myself with certain content that made its way into the book, I also have found some portions that I'm like, well, if I were writing it today, I would
Yep.
have said this and I would have added this. And so that's all a part of it, I'm sure. But yeah, and that's the reason why people will
Yeah.
come out with like a second edition, right? And
Yep.
so anyway, I'm going to relish in the moment right now though. But
I
please tell me I'm not alone. Am I not alone?
no,
Please,
no,
please,
my
please, please. Okay.
no, no, you're not. I love this so much. I just love the opportunity to connect with you in this way. I mean, I like my cheeks hurt so much from like just I don't know. I love it so much. No, my my mentor and good friend, Dr. Chris Wildermuth, one of the things she said years ago that stuck with me was she said, authors aren't necessarily smarter. They just finish it and they realize and accept that it's actually never done. And
Yes.
it is, and it's hard. And then when you go to do the, if you're doing, the audiobook recording of it and you start reading it and you're like, oh, okay. I mean,
Yes.
and it's interesting because, yeah, either because of your experience, because I mean, I definitely experienced that of, man, I recognize like in my work, like there's some actually really big gaps because of my lived experience being a, Midwest white woman working with
Yeah.
largely white audiences, that there's there's a limitation to the
Right.
content, and being okay, and not being okay,
Yeah.
but accepting that this is where it is. This is what I've learned since then. How do you bring that into it? And how do you invite people? And I love that you've already done that of, I want to hear what resonates for people and what challenged them and what stretched
Yeah.
them, and where might there be, opportunities, and then keep that list of, because you'll
Right.
obviously continue, but
Yes.
I don't know that,
Yeah, you're
I don't
never
know.
done. I love
You're
that.
never
Thank you for
done.
sharing the words of wisdom from your mentor with me because that resonates deeply. Yes. And I appreciate that in many ways, especially because when we think about this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, we often say there's no destination. We should constantly be filling ourselves with knowledge and, becoming more culturally intelligent so that, we can apply that information to how in which we are interacting and helping to advocate, for others. And so, and that just, you're not exonerated from that just because you are a
Mm-mm.
DEI practitioner, right? No,
Sure,
in fact, you need
sure.
to lean
Yeah.
in even more so and continue that learning journey. And so, yes, even days now, after I've written this book, I'm sure there's a ton of things that I will encounter as I am like on the book tour and sharing some of the content from the book with others that will find its way into those conversations that may not be reflected in the book, but that's not
Yeah.
a bad thing.
No, no. Right. And that's one of the points you make over and over and over is expect non-closure, expect that things like are going to
Yes.
shift and evolve, and how do you,
Yeah.
that idea that there's not a destination. I have to say, so for people who are listening and going to buy the book, it's really beautifully laid out and designed, and the content is great. And I appreciated how you cover a lot, and
Do.
it's a really nice read, especially for folks who may not be as experienced or knowledgeable, which I'm
Right.
curious to hear who was your audience as you were writing this. But and I think you and I talked about this when I was on your show, but something that I was um try to be intentional with my book was designing it for a more neurotypical or not neurodiverse brain. And one of the
Yeah.
things that I appreciated about your design was the fact that you had a lot of visuals. You had a lot
Yeah.
of I love the visual summaries at the end,
Mhm.
capturing the key ideas, just how you use different spacing and
Yeah.
visual cues made it a really easy read for somebody who sometimes struggles to get through a book. So I wanted to just name, and I don't
Yeah.
know if that was intentional on your part,
It
but I'm
was. It
curious to
was.
know. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought so.
Yeah, so this about me. My background is marketing communications. And so, again, I care deeply about the presentation and the look and feel of the product. And I think that as a DEI practitioner, we want to make sure that we are approaching an exercise like, publishing a book with all of those different types of
Mm,
audiences in mind, and so I write often about neurodiversity and how people
mhm.
learn in different ways. And so the print is actually a little larger than
I
most
I
traditional
noticed
books.
that. Mhm.
Yep. And there's a lot of call outs. I do have those
Mhm.
chapter summaries. And so people can go
Mhm.
back and reference some of the more salient points that were presented in each chapter. And so it really is designed, as I mentioned, to be a tool, something that people will revisit and come back to. Um, and my hope is that this will attract a pretty broad audience. I mean, I know that we can't be all things to all people when we're really designing something, but just generally speaking, as I was thinking about the audience, I knew that I wanted this to have value to individuals that could be a little bit further along in their journey, but they just really need some additional guidance and support to know, how do I go to the next level, as well as those individuals who have not yet fully engaged. And so part of what the book offers is a chapter actually in the beginning, and it deals with who this book is for,
Mhm.
to your point. And it also talks about different personas, right? Different types
Yeah,
of
I love
people
that.
that are, somehow associated, affiliated, maybe trying to figure out where they want to be within, this broad work of DEIB. And, some examples would be like active opposition, passive unaware,
Okay, wait,
passive
I'm going to slow.
awareness.
I want to slow down actually, because this is one of the
Alrighty.
things I wanted to spend. Is that okay? I wanted to spend some time
Absolutely.
on this because I think that, when I got the opportunity to read the first chapter and then having the first couple of chapters and then now getting the chance to read the whole thing, that was the section I really appreciated as a point of reflection. And obviously that takes some honest reflection of where you're at, and you do. And so the reason I want to slow it down, because I think that this is a really, I just want to hear you speak more to it. And there's so much value in us being able to identify. So where are we on the journey, which is different than where we think we are. That's something that there are times when, and we're going to just have a real conversation. There are times when I think I'm further along on my journey because I'm further along than where I was before, but I'm still not necessarily maybe where I could be, where I hope to be, right? And so sometimes like, well, no, I'm actually here. And then when you actually reflect on the where you could be and what does that actually look like in practice to be a really active, courageous ally, like, oh, I'm not actually as far along. So let's break down the 5 and talk through them. Yeah,
I would love to. I'm going to start with really just reflecting a little bit further on what you just shared. What I love about your vulnerability and talking about your story as you think about where am I on this journey, it is all about competing against yourself or benchmarking against yourself. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I felt was really critical for this book is that we need to make sure that not only are we doing those critical reflections for ourselves, which you do beautifully, but most people, they will assess that question based upon where they are against someone else. And what I want people to really lean into is that we're not competing against anyone but ourselves in terms of just, am I becoming better than I was the day before, right? And I think that's so important to amplify because, in chapter 1, when I do introduce the personas, it's right on the heels of talking about identifying mental models. And it's where I really help the audience to understand that everyone's lens and their point in which they are entering, the conversation, the proverbial conversation of DEI is vastly different. And so we have to take that in mind because I think that has a lot to do with, it should have a lot to do with the way in which we try to engage people and bring them along. If you try to bring someone to point Z when they haven't even scratch the surface of A to K, then it's going to be hard for them to really find their place and to get comfortable to where they're going to sustain that level of engagement and curiosity. Yeah. And so I think that the mental models piece is very critical. So to your question, I'll just talk briefly about the 5 personas. The first is active opposition. And these are individuals who are deeply rooted, right, in their choice to be a strong opponent of DEI. And it's important to recognize that. These are individuals who, quite honestly, maybe their minds cannot be changed and who are committed to disrupting the work of DEI. I want to pause there for a second and say, this book is not for those individuals. In fact, part of my philosophy with the work that I do, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily the approach that every practitioner in this space should take, but for me, I realize that that's not my audience. That's not who I feel like I have been equipped with the skill sets and the ability to reach, nor do I desire that. It is great emotional capital that has to be spent to even attempt to see if you can move somebody that's in a place of just deeply rooted opposition. That's not my audience.
Yeah. Well, and I remember, sorry, real quickly, but I remember when we had our conversation last year, that was something that stood out when you're like, that's not who I'm going after. And I remember you saying the quiet person in the back who's listening, but unsure, that's who I'm going for. Yes. And again, that was one of the things I appreciated in your writing was you also spoke to obviously this is complex. It's layered.
Yes.
There's not one solution to it. And I appreciated where you named, this is where even DEI practitioners disagree. Like, do we force people along? Do we meet them where they are? If we're meeting them where they are, how are we prioritizing white comfort, right? Dominant culture comfort, and wrestling with that there's not one answer to that. It's, figuring out what's right. So that was, sorry, as you were talking, that was coming up. So please continue.
No, I'm glad you reminded me of that. And you're right. I was very clear from the beginning and even throughout the writing process. And I'm even clear about this and how I show up to this work from a consulting perspective. I mean, I truly believe that the population of people that at their core, they really do care about getting this right and wanting to engage in a way that really leads towards sustainable change. I think that population is great enough to where I have personally made the decision that I'm not going after the naysayers. And I don't mean naysayers to where, there's some things that they question. I'm talking about those that are, again, in deep opposition. No matter what you do, you're not going to change their minds, right? And I would far rather spend my time and energy on those that I believe I have the ability to help shift. And there's a likelihood of behavioral change that aligns more with, again, the value set and the opportunities that diversity, equity, and inclusion bring. And so I stick by that. The second persona is passive unaware. And as you can imagine, just by that labeling, these are people who are unaware and they cannot engage in the work of DEI simply because they're unaware, they're uninformed. And so they can be identified by their lack of engagement in the conversations, by their inability to recognize the severity of the problems that loom concerning equity and equality. And I do believe that with the proper guidance, the proper resources, the proper influencers in those individuals' lives, whether it's through resources or through, people, that there's an opportunity to get them engaged. And so that's passive unaware. The next is passive awareness. And it's, as you can imagine, the opposite. But passive aware individuals are the ones who can appreciate that attention is being given to the work of DEI, right? They're like, yes, I am so glad I'm with an organization that cares deeply about DEI. I'm glad we have a chief diversity officer, and I'm glad that we have a statement and we're doing things that's impactful. We're changing systems and minds. But the problem is that they see it as the responsibility of someone else, that they aren't owning the accountability for it. And I truly believe this work belongs to all of us. So there's a message for those individuals as well. And then thirdly, active awareness. When we think about being actively aware from a mental model perspective, these are the ones who know that this work is necessary and they are actively working to advance it. Maybe these are practitioners. Maybe these are ones who are leading this work within their respective organizations. Maybe they're just human rights activists or social justice workers. And so they're regularly doing the work, but they also need support to help bring others along, right? And so that is the audience that this book also appeals to. And then the last one is overactive awareness, right? And I think this is so important to also amplify, because while maybe at the core of just hearing that labeling, it may lead some to believe, okay, well, those are people that are just really, really sold out by any means necessary. But the challenge is that sometimes if we are overactive in our awareness, it can show up as council culture, because we're frustrated that maybe others are not where we perceive they should be. And I am not one that really believes in the council culture. I think that we need all of us being a part of this work and this conversation and engaging in a way that helps us to rise higher. And so those are the individuals that this book is for. And I wanted to outline that early on, so that people could then begin to identify. And at the end of that chapter, there's some critical reflection. Where are you within the spectrum of all those personas? And what do you feel like you need to do or spend some time further reflecting on if you are deciding that you want to continue this learning journey, to make sure that you're at the right posture to be open to do so?
Yeah, that's, one of the things I really appreciated about the book was those really pointed reflection questions at the end. And when I was reading through those, and again, this is where I didn't highlight how many times you said it, but it was courage over comfort, right? I mean, quite a number of times you write that, and
The
part of
entire
that,
chapter, yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's multiple points where it's like, oh, right, and even in the act of reflecting on this is how to be courageous in that moment, to go, where am I really? And in what situations, when I don't know if this is helpful. I'm just going to like name this. I also want to make sure I'm not like centering on my experience, because I'm aware that that's something as white women do. So I just want to name that. But I also just want to honor the impact that your book had, and the way that it helped me process through it as well, was realizing that there are times where I'm moving down a few different ones, and, and not necessarily like, oh, I am this, oh, I am, passive awareness, but it's like, oh, there are definitely times when I'm passively unaware, or there are times when I am very much passive awareness. And then there's little moments that are that, active awareness, and dancing between those. That was definitely, I think that was such a powerful framing to invite people to get really courageously curious. As you know, that's definitely like my thing about, but where are you really? And I appreciate that point you made about, being in competition, of just like, how are we continuing to be better than we were before? How are we continuing to move forward? And recognizing that, recognizing when you're like, oh, I've been passively unaware.
Yeah. Now,
far longer than I realized.
I love the revelation, Sarah, of the mental models and those personas, how they can show up differently based upon the circumstances, right? And how we will evolve and grow and learn. And so that's a really good point that I hope people will keep in mind as they are engaged in this book. And, I also want to comment on the competition thing again. I hear this so much. And so I think I am a bit oversensitized to it, because we do a lot of assessments at NWC. And when we do these deep dive assessments, it is pretty recurring that our client partners will ask, well, how did we do? Sure. And really what they're looking for is a score or a grade. And it's not a grade of how you did independently, but how did we do, maybe comparatively speaking, to others that you've done assessments for, to others who are in this industry. And so we have this going in position with our clients where we go ahead and just, level set around, this is how we approach benchmarking. You are benchmarking against your own selves. That is the best way to do it, because you want to make sure that you are improving. If you're not at 100%, then there's still opportunity for growth and refinement. So don't be so concerned about what others are doing, unless you're using that information to really just modify, tweak, and inform what you should be doing, right? But so I appreciate that. And I think the same applies to individuals when they're also on their own personal journey. Well, I'm not as bad as so-and-so. Okay. But what does that really mean, though? Why does that matter? Right. What can you do better? Yeah.
Yeah. What are you trying? I'm smiling a little bit, because when, we do assessments maybe around different topics, it's always like, so how do we compare? And, and as you're saying that, I really appreciate that. You're benchmarking against yourself, and if the goal, again, here's another beautiful opportunity to get curious, is the goal for us to feel like we did enough, right? And that's something you explore too, of the right activity versus impact, or making it so transactional that it's event based instead of an ongoing. Because I could definitely see, because one of the questions that I was reflecting on in preparation for this was, what are those organizations who you feel like are making strides? What are they doing differently? Like that point of comparison, I think, could be valuable, just because sometimes we don't even know what we don't know of what it can look like, because
Oh,
again, it's, you
absolutely.
know,
Absolutely. But to me, that's not benchmarking. That is more
yeah,
of, just, pulling together data of example sets, basically. And that's what we
yeah,
say. That's kind of the way in which we approach what you're probably referring to as benchmarking. This is what we
yeah,
would say to our client partners. And so I think that is critical. I find it very appropriate for people to be exposed to case studies and how other organizations have navigated maybe similar type challenges so that they can, pull out what's relevant to them. Because, it's very nuanced. This work is not going to look the
yeah,
same across every organization. That's just it's not possible. The other thing too that I think is important to spend some time on in our conversation is really going back to this courage piece, because the courage piece was really the impetus in many ways of why book number 3 came into existence. What I found in my time as a practitioner in this work is that one of the main barriers that kept a lot of organizations and leaders in organizations who were charged with this work from really feeling compelled and equipped to create sustainable change was how mystical all of the
mm,
unknowns, how daunting this work
mm,
felt. It just felt so complex. And we
mm-hmm,
know that when something feels really, really hard to us, there's automatically a disadvantage that can overcome us if we aren't careful. And so for me, I wanted to try to address that piece of it. So that's where the whole notion of let's unravel the knot, right? I just, imagine this big, and I remember having a conversation with someone and I'm like, after we've had some conversations and I was really presenting some points and I could tell they were grappling with it. And I said, what's coming up for you? Just socialize with me. What are you thinking? What are you perceiving? And the person just very exasperated said, I just feel so overwhelmed. This is just so hard. I feel like we just can't win. It just feels so, is it even possible? This is just so
mm,
complex and almost like throwing up the hands, right? And I was like, okay, Nika, what do you do with this?
mm,
And I realized that even before I could continue to attempt to successfully guide them and consult them and help them navigate a path of changing systems, policies, procedures, while at the same time, because you have to do them in parallel, changing
mm-hmm,
mindsets and equipping people with knowledge and information and application of what to do with now this knowledge that they're being exposed to, that I had to help them get into their minds that while this work may seem complex, there is a way for us to break this down and to simplify it. And so I feel like it's important to socialize that because that's really the impetus of why Inclusion Uncomplicated came to be. And what I'm also finding it important to share is that, and if people get the book and they read the book, they will clearly know that my position is not that DEI is not hard, because there's a lot of really
right,
hard aspects of it, but it doesn't have to be to the point to where we remain on the sidelines or we
mm,
remain complicit if we're able to engage in this work in a way where we feel like we are being met where we are. Not
mm-hmm,
going to leave you there. That would be a
mm-hmm,
disservice to you and to the world, but to help people along, to unravel the knots, right?
yeah,
So that it becomes uncomplicated, right?
yeah.
And so that's what I'm hoping this book will do for a lot of people.
You just spoke to one of my favorite lines, which is, I believe in meeting people where they are, but not content to leave them there. It was so
Yeah.
powerful. It was,
Yeah.
and again, and that's a perspective. That's how you show up with this work. There was something
Yeah.
that was really resonant for me. I have to tell you, the whole untangling of the knot, it, the, what, so, um, a lot of the work that we do perhaps in like different spaces is somewhat similar in the sense of how do we see the like how do we honor the complexity? How
Yeah.
do we see it
Yeah.
for the different parts? How do we understand that how we need to approach this complexity is different? And so the analogy was such, I mean, it was a song after my own heart, from the standpoint of one of the ways that we talk about when we're dealing with adaptive challenges, which is exactly what you're, again, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is the biggest adaptive challenge that we face,
Yeah.
because there is layers and complexity. And like you said, there are technical components we need to change, and there's
Absolutely.
mindsets and challenging values and challenging beliefs. And the analogy I'll use is like a tangled up ball of Christmas lights. And we
Yes.
just have to start tugging. So when I saw it, I was like, oh God,
Yeah.
yes,
You have to
and
start someplace. And so I love
right.
that, analogy, because that feels really complex. And some people are like, I'm just going to throw this away. I'm not even going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. It's not worth it. Right. But that's one response. But is it the best response? No. Let's face our fears. Let's face the discomfort, and let's just take one part of it at a time and start to kind of untangle it. And then after a while, we'll see that we're making progress. And that's what this is about. Progress and not perfection overnight. Incremental change is okay. In fact, it's smart. It's healthy, because it allows us to not get frustrated too early in a process, right? And so that big ball of yarn, that was the visual that I spoke of, and that I saw in my head as I go back to the story I just shared of talking with this client partner who was just defeated.
Yeah.
And, and I thought, Nika, what can you do? What can you do? At that moment, it wasn't about trying to get you to believe that DEI is important. You know that. You're just stuck. Because you don't want to do the wrong thing. You don't know exactly what to do. So much complexity around it, right? But I don't want that to be part of the hindrance to keep us from moving forward. So we have to first and foremost believe that we and our organizations and our society and our world is deserving of equity, inclusion, and belonging and accessibility for everyone. And if once we believe that, no matter how daunting it is, we need to give ourselves a pep talk if we need to, but we need to make sure that we're committing to the process. And I believe that part of committing to a process is to have it to be attainable, to feel not so complex, to feel like we can simplify it. That's not to say this work is simple, but I think that there are some really tangible things and ways in which we can take it one bite at a time. If we find ourselves in that predicament of feeling like, I don't even want to take the first step because this just feels like it's impossible.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's coming up for me hearing you talk about this, and the connection that I'm making, is that the work, let's see if I can articulate this. I'll just say it and we'll clean it up. But, everything that you're talking about, that it's progress, not perfection, right? That there's this, politeness that can get in our way. And you're speaking to very white dominant culture norms. And the connection that I'm making is that, the act of even how we navigate, how we engage, how we move forward in progress is also a way for us to build up a muscle of showing up differently, of pushing against norms that are, I like are in our DNA. It's like the polite, nice Midwest white woman. There are times where it's like, oh my God, how do I just get this out of my system a little bit? Because it's the air that we breathe. And hearing you as you were talking about it is like, it's like progress on multiple layers, right? As we engage with this work, that was just what was coming up for me hearing you talk and the language you were using.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I think that when we are on our learning journeys, we often have to peel back the layers and really identify, okay, what am I not seeing here? What am I not, curious enough about to help us think just better engage with the information in terms of how it needs to apply to our way of thinking, our way of being, and the influence that we have in the spaces that we show up. So I appreciate that you said that. There's so many layers to this. And I'm just grateful that there are individuals like you and so many others who are willing to do some of the hard work just to help it become a little bit more manageable and digestible for others, right? Yeah. And that was my point. I don't pretend to have all the answers around this. But I do believe that I have enough knowledge and wherewithal to put together a tool that can help people unravel the knots unravel the
Yeah.
knots.
One of the things that I think is so powerful about how you lay out this book is, one, not only do you give you explore some really common language or
Hmm.
frameworks, right? And talking about it. But again, you invite people to ask some tough questions. You also share some really um, tangible practices of like, here's things you can
Yeah.
say for those of you.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that a couple of different points that I had captured was, the powerful question of, am I really doing this activity to help others, or am I doing this to position myself or my organization in a certain light that will gain me benefit? And what a beautiful, again, courageous, curious question. And I love the question
Yeah.
before of, what am I not curious enough about? Because I think that
Yeah.
is a trap we can fall into, is thinking we know, thinking we understand, thinking we have a sense of the realities of it,
Yeah.
and that gets in our way, instead of going, God, what else don't I know? And not from a
Yeah.
place of shaming, but just from a place of,
Right.
so on that hand, but I
Yeah.
you talk about, you had a section of talking about the difference between an obligation versus an opportunity. And I'd love
Hmm.
to just pause there a little bit too, from the standpoint of ask asking ourselves some of these hard questions.
Yeah.
um Especially those of us who are part of the dominant culture, like, that's part of the work, is that internal and external. So I'd love to just hear what comes up for you. um
That part of the book was really instrumental for me, in terms of my influence and consulting work, because what I noticed is that many organizations were coming to us to do the work, which, on the surface, yes, that's great. We want everybody to do the work, right? But they were doing the work, I felt, for not the right reasons.
yeah.
Um, and when I say not the right reasons, when we are obligated to something, it certainly helps us to remain devoted to it, because we don't want to have to experience the consequences or the repercussions of not doing it. And that's when it feels like a burden to us. And
Mm,
I would much rather people to not approach this work as a burden, right? Because we're talking about people. Don't approach humans as them being a burden. Let's approach this as, what are the opportunities and the strengths that we really can lean into, that's going to get us excited. It's going to make us want to have the desire to do this work, not because we have to, or in spite of. There's a difference between doing the work in spite of versus doing it because we really do believe that there's great value and opportunity and strength in it. And so that was really important to highlight. Something else, Sarah, that I think maybe some people in your audience may not be aware of, but Inclusion Uncomplicated, the name itself, is not just entirely new with the release of this book. For the past 3 years, I have been putting out short clip videos called Inclusion Uncomplicated, Simplified DEI. And it was all to help provide those bite-sized pieces of information so that people could have a resource. And we release this content, this video series, new content every week. And so they're no more than like 2-minute clips. And I thought, this seems to be very valuable. We were getting a good bit of engagement in terms of the playlist and subscriptions, and lots of comments when we would share it out. And so what this has also helped me to realize is that we need different ways of reaching people, right? I think that sometimes we always relegate the learning to be more of lecture style training. I don't even use the word training at NWC. We prefer, learning experiences, because it's not just a one and done. A training sounds like a very singular event or destination, and that's not the case. We really need to, going back to the mental models commentary that I shared earlier, we need to have a strategy that allows us to look across multiple modalities, ways, and approaches of reaching people. And so I share that because Inclusion Uncomplicated video series is also, a large part of what, really created the desire for me to also want to write this book as a step forward.
Well, and you're speaking to, well, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand. So let's talk about the New York Times article. I don't remember the name, but I think the timing of it in this conversation, because I've had a few people send my way and like, what do you think about this, right? And it was
Yeah,
so just to be clear, it was an opinion piece. It was an opinion
it
article.
was. It was very
It
much an
was
opinion piece.
about how some of the traditional ways of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts aren't moving the needle and potentially could do harm. I definitely had thoughts and reactions to it of, my first thought was it that the work isn't moving the needle, or is it that people are unwilling to move the needle?
Yeah,
But to your point, and, and you cover this in your book, is it can't just be an event. This is not
right.
a box to check. And if that's how you, and we know behavior change and value exploration and exploring, literally a history of systemic oppression isn't something that's going to be
Right.
untangled in a 2-hour
Right.
session. So I'm curious to just get your thoughts in response
Absolutely.
to that.
Yeah, that New York Times article, as you pointed out, certainly it was an opinion piece, and I'm glad that we're amplifying that because it was an opinion, and not necessarily an opinion that I would say is really popular among a lot of the practitioners that I'm in, close communication with. I think that it was very short-sighted in that it presented the totality of diversity training as looking one way, and there
Mm, mm,
is a way to do diversity learning experiences that can help move the needle in concert with also other organizational efforts like dealing with systems, policies, procedures, and culture. I mean, you can certainly have some behaviors that are placed in conversations and learning experiences that you expose people to, but if the system is not designed where people can really operate with that mindset,
mm,
then it's not
mm,
going to work. So it is a both
mm.
and. And so my challenge with the article was that I don't feel like it brought that really important aspect to the fore. It talked a good bit about how many white men in particular feel guilted, shamed, and blamed to the point to where it creates more harm, for them. And then they're like, there's not really a place for me. And, and in my book, I talk about, I don't believe in guilting, shaming, and blaming, but I do believe that we have to be really careful when, even in opinion pieces, to send a message that broadly can cause a population of individuals to negate
Yeah.
the work itself, right? Or to see it as having an adverse effect. I think that we all know that there could be harm if it's not done well and it's done
Yeah.
right. I
Yeah.
just want us to be sure that we aren't amplifying the negativity that can occur and does occur across all different industries and disciplines,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
believe that gives people too much license sometimes, especially those who are already not fully convinced,
Mm-hmm.
to then say, okay, well, I told you so, and that
Mm-hmm.
does not help us. And so, yeah. So
It,
sometimes
it's
I question maybe the motives and the intent of those who write such opinion pieces, especially if
yeah.
I don't feel like it's completely balanced. But yeah, it's just,
I
again,
mean,
one person's opinion against
that's
another.
it is, and that's part of getting curious, right? And that's part of
Yes.
like
Yes.
how is this reinforcing the beliefs I have, and how is it challenging it?
Yes.
And exactly to your point, and I think that was a point that at the end of the article was like, actually, what can help move the needle
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
systems
Yeah.
work. I mean, it was a small
Yes.
section of it, but they got to that,
Okay. Yes.
I mean, it was the last paragraph, but that's something that, when I think about the opportunities I've had to be really directly involved with the work that my colleague Jilmada does with organizations, where the needle has moved is when it is the combination, exactly like you're talking about. It's the both and
Yes.
it's the system, because, and I loved how you said it, and I didn't quite capture it exactly, but when you're saying that if the I think of it as a container. If
Yes.
the container hasn't changed, and we're trying to change behaviors or beliefs, that's always going to be in conflict and will almost like suffocate any little sparks that come up. And so you have to look at it.
Absolutely.
And so you have worked with hundreds of organizations. You have been able to support them on their journey. What are some of the components? And again, some of this you talk about in your book of like how important assessments are, how important it is that you get a
Yeah.
real
Yeah.
honest view of where are you currently. And I just want to make one like point. As a white person doing this work, how do we right size our discomfort?
Yeah.
That's a concept that
Yeah.
like we'll use sometimes of like how do we right size the problem? And
Yeah.
and making sure like how do I right size the discomfort I'm feeling compared to the harm that's actually happening to other people.
Yeah.
So I don't that was just something that was coming up for me, but is, I do want to go back to my original question, which is what are some of those strategies, mindsets, right? Practices that you have seen, because again, your approach isn't a one and done. You are walking alongside individuals and organizations as they are on this journey, right? And helping them understand it's a journey. So what are some of the things that you found to be just most effective? I don't want to say right because there isn't a right, but just
Yeah.
that have been really powerful.
So one would be, and I'm probably making up a word here, but the stick to itness effect, right?
Mm,
I think that so many organizations, they abandon the process too prematurely because they don't see results as quickly as they would like. And probably the reason they don't see results as quickly as they would like is maybe they were misguided to start, right? And they just felt
mm,
like, well, let me do this, this, and this. And then, yeah, now we have arrived. So the stick to itness is really important. I think the other thing is this piece about accountability. What gets
mm,
measured and tracked gets done, but it doesn't just end there. And then where you hold people accountable, they will deliver. But you need both of those. You need metrics, but then you also need accountability. And accountability is something that has to be shared across the organization. It is not just something that should be the sole responsibility of the chief diversity officer or even the C-suite leaders. They need to certainly be the main influencers as key stakeholders in the organization to be able to help inform the general, associate body of what does this look like for us? What are those behaviors that are expected based upon this type of guiding principle or philosophy that we are governing ourselves by? Here are the norms. And then there needs to be some level of accountability across everyone to help try to
mm.
maintain them. And so that can look like a variety of things. But I think that until we get to a place to where we can be comfortable knowing that it's okay to have some accountability mechanisms in place assigned to this work, that we're going to be able to move the needle. I don't know why organizations are so afraid sometimes of the accountability piece. I guess it's because I think it goes back to my theory. It goes back to like, yeah, that sounds good in theory, but in practice, we're going to lose our whole workforce. Well, okay, but what is that gaining you though? By
Mhm.
having a workforce that's continuing to not allow you to be able to be on the cutting edge of what needs to happen in the future to attract the best talent, retain the best talent. And I mean, so we have to help them connect the dots to the application of what that looks like at the individual level within an organization.
Yeah.
I often say that you don't have to have a certain position or power by, title or position in order to be able to influence this work.
Mm,
And that's what I mean by I think that we need to have shared accountability across the organization, but that does start with the leadership being willing to first model and then to uphold whatever those norms and those value sets are, so that others can lean into it and realize that, yes, they do need to be very much considering how can I align with these principles.
yeah. It's such a common trap, um, you know, related to this work, related to really any culture work, that it often
Yeah,
gets
yeah.
relegated to, whether it's the diversity, equity, and inclusion person, whether it's the HR person. And I
Yes.
appreciated that you're naming that. I mean, we're all on the hook to make this change. We all create the culture we're in. We all are playing a role in what that culture looks like. Some people have more influence, to the point you made,
Yeah.
executive level, senior leaders, and why that's so important. And yeah. And it goes back to that a little bit of it's an endurance game, right? That
Oh
this
yeah,
isn't,
stick to
you know,
itness. Yes.
hmm there's not,
Absolutely.
well, and, and because like, it's interesting thing about the metrics, because, you were saying earlier when people are like, how did we compare? And even that's a shift. That is a shift from how we run business. It's a shift from how we,
Yeah.
like even as individuals, it's going to be messy at times. It's going to be unclear at times. You're going to mess up
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. Like that's just inevitable part
Oh,
of
absolutely.
doing this work, and just being in relationship with humans is like, you're going to mess up. Like it's not if, it's
Absolutely.
when. And I think
Yes.
that endurance, that you're speaking to, it's not the norm. It's not,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Thank you for giving me a word. The stick to itness is not nearly as articulate as the endurance. So thank you. But yes, that's precisely it. Are we willing to endure what this process entails? Because there are going to be hurdles and obstacles, probably, every few miles, right? Then we're going to see a guidepost that's going to put us in the right direction, and we're going to maybe be rolling with the rhythm. But then, yeah, if there are going to be other issues that will arise, because we are a society that is made up of people,
yeah,
and we're all different, and we all have different needs. And so there's always going to be an opportunity for us to level up. And so the upskilling around how to do that most effectively to be able to endure is what's going to help separate those who are really deeply committed, not just in rhetoric, but in deed,
yeah,
to really seeing the full maturation of the possibilities of diversity, equity, and inclusion within their respective organizations.
yeah. I mean, everything you just described is, couldn't help but go, what a gift we would give ourselves
Yeah.
to be able to again build up our capacity
Yeah.
to realize like, yep, no, we're building up our capacity to navigate something complex. We're building up our
Mhm.
capacity to repair and to get
Exactly.
curious and to own and to, again, because that's just a natural part, and most importantly, in creating a space and a world that's safe for everyone. Right. Um,
Yes, everyone, leave no one behind. That's part of one of the
yeah,
lines that I repeat in the book. Leave no one behind. Um, so yeah, I'm right there
we
with you, friend.
we are coming up on our time. I want to just give a moment. Is there anything like what did we not cover that you wanted to make sure? And also, this doesn't have to be our last conversation. I mean, we've had you on twice. I mean,
No,
you're
of
in the third.
course. Well, I love the fact that you invited me back. I do appreciate that. We've covered a lot of ground, as you mentioned. I feel pretty satisfied. Something else, though, that I would love to plug is that it's not just a short inclusion uncomplicated video series. It's not just a book, but I continue to want to build upon this idea, because I think there's a lot of merit to the possibilities that can deliver by doing so. And so one of the other ways in which we're helping organizations to lean into this message of unraveling the knot that binds humanity together is we have an inclusion and complicated learning experience. And it
Mm,
is really all about unraveling the knot. And it's like a day and a half long in-person learning experience. It can be virtual for those that need those special accommodations, but it really is intended to be in person. And we're going to take a lot of the concepts in the book and a lot of those micro learning activities and really expand them, and a lot of critical reflection. And so I'm hoping that organizations will find that experience to be worthwhile for a cohort of individuals within their organization, particularly maybe those that are in leadership. And so just wanted to put that into the
yeah.
universe, and hope that it lands on some people who are curious and will want to learn more and contact us.
Yeah, and no, I'm so glad that you spoke to that, and we will put all this information in the show notes, so people who are interested, will connect them with your website, share a link to
Thanks.
where they can buy the book. So, where can people purchase your book?
Yeah. So Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI, can be purchased anywhere you like to get your books, you also can go to Amazon. And so we hope that you will check it out, and we would love to hear your feedback. We love to know what's resonating, what curiosities you're holding, but to be in conversation about it. It's intended to spark dialogue.
What's the best place for people to connect with you if people are hearing this and they want to reach out and they want to learn more about the work you're doing?
Thank you. I so appreciate that. I think probably the best way is just to go to my website, which is nikawhite.com. I also have a speaker website, which is nikawhitespeaks.com. But both of those sites will direct folks to multiple ways to follow me, connect with me. And I would very much welcome those opportunities.
Yeah. What do you want to celebrate? I mean, I just let's end where we started. What's something you want to celebrate about this, the journey you've been on and this milestone that we're in this present beautiful moment together?
What I want to celebrate in this moment, Sarah, is the fact that the connection points of deep convictions around this work and around just a care and compassion for people has connected me with individuals that amazing, such as yourself. And I think that what that does for me is it gives me even greater hope around the good in the world and around the possibilities of when we put our minds together and we really do care about something and we can, really hold steadfast with that endurance, that we can make change. And that's important to me because I don't want us to ever lose hope. So I want to just celebrate that. So I want to celebrate you, my friend. I want to celebrate all that you bring. You've been such a big supporter. And I love how you show up to the world and to this work. I mean, and while our works, there's some intersections there. They're not directly kind of, connected, but they are in the sense that it is a care for people to show up better for themselves and for others,
Yeah. I so appreciate you.
That's what I want to celebrate. Yeah.
Thank you, Twitter, for bringing us together.
I know, exactly. You have to catch the previous conversations on conversations to hear that whole story about how Sarah and I connected on Twitter.
Right.
Immediately caught it and no looking back.
We, in the show notes, Nick, as you're listening to this, we will put in the show notes, we'll relink to it so you can listen to the part 1 and the part 2 and hear the evolution. Dr. Nika White, thank you. I mean, thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for giving the world your wisdom, your emotional energy, for, your endurance in all of this, and for sharing this time. And just, a huge congratulations again to Inclusion Uncomplicated. It's a real triumph and it's a huge milestone. And I'm so excited for the impact that it will continue to make. And so just thank you for being you.
Thank you. I receive all of that, my friend. Thank you so very much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm just grateful and honored that you thought of me to want to bring me back.
Our guest this week has been Dr. Nika White. And while I have pages of notes from reading her book in our conversation, I think the thing that I'm really holding on to is that idea of, am I better today than yesterday? And how do I continue to move forward in progress and not perfection? I think that is a real easy thing to get caught up into. And that is something I really want to hold on to. And we want to hear from you. Help us understand what resonated for you, what pushed you, what challenged you maybe. You can reach out to us at podcast@sarahnollwilson.com, or you can find me on social media where my DMs are always open. And if you'd like to find out more about the work we do and how we can help you or your team have conversations that matter, check us out at sarahnollwilson.com. You can also pick up a copy of my book, Don't Feed the Elephants, wherever books are sold. And if you'd like to support the show, please consider becoming a patron, visiting patreon.com/conversations on conversations, where your financial contributions will not only sustain this podcast and the amazing team that makes it possible, you'll also get access to some pretty great benefits like swag. And if you haven't already, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platform. Doing so helps us get the word out, increases our visibility to bring on amazing guests like Dr. Nika White. Thank you to our incredible team who makes this podcast possible, to our producer, Nika Wilson, sound editor, Drew Knoll, transcriptionist, Becky Reinert, marketing consultant, Caitlin Summit Nelson, and the rest of the Snowco crew. And just one big final round of applause for Dr. Nika White, and big congratulations on her latest book. Please go out and buy it, check it out, buy it for a friend. It's a really great read. This has been Conversations on Conversations. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, when we can change the conversations we have with ourselves and others, we can change the world. So thank you all for joining. We will see you next week. Please be sure to rest, rehydrate, and we'll see you soon.